Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Bakari Lumumba, back once again, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage while always betting on Black. Here once again to discuss an issue that I think has been a hot topic in the mainstream media as well as in the Black community. And that is, of course, the, I would argue, issues or surrounding Kyrie Irving, his alleged anti-Semitic comments. And of course, so we want to kind of ask the question, what to make of Kyrie Irving's suspension. As many of you know, he maybe about almost a week ago tweeted without context a link to a documentary entitled From Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up Black America, wake up. I may be paraphrasing there. And it's alleged that in the documentary, he stated, and if you want to be part of the conversation, you know what to do. The link is in this description. I'll put the link in the chat as well, and we're going to have a robust conversation regarding this issue. So make sure you tap in, and we're going to have a robust conversation. But it's alleged that in the documentary, there was a statement made that, of course, Jewish people took part in being shipbuilders for the transatlantic slave trade. That also was alleged that in the documentary, there was denials of the German Jewish Holocaust that took place during and around the period known as World War II. So many people took umbrage with that, argued that he made some that he was endorsing, keyword, they're not saying that he advocated or that he personally stated that anti-Semitism was taking place, or that he was promoting anti-Semitism through his own language, that he was endorsing media that had anti-Semitic views. And so we're going to discuss that. I think one of the major issues we have to look at is the fact that he actually tweeted out the documentary without context, right? I think one of the things that I find rather curious or odd or ironic, right, is the fact that Amazon isn't being taken to task by the fact that, of course, they're allowing this information to be disseminated and purchased on their platform, sold on their platform, nor is the individual that created the actual documentary on the Kyrie Irving. And I think part of that is because, of course, he is a prominent figure. Many would argue that he has influence over individuals. And so as a result, many would argue that there's a argument being made that what he's low-hanging fruit, he's the softest target, and so people are going to attack him. I've also heard people argue that this is just what happens to Black people. Black people are always being accused of anti-Semitism and attacked by Jewish people, European Jews, and as a result, this is what happens. Kanye was right. But many people may not be aware of the fact that maybe 2 or 3 seasons ago, Miles Leonard, who of course was a journeyman center for the Miami Heat, was on a social media platform playing a video game. Why is a grown man playing a video game? Hey, I don't know, but this is a white guy. And he allegedly, and I'm saying allegedly because I haven't heard the actual video, made an anti-Semitic slur, articulated one, voiced one while he was playing a video game. He was immediately suspended by the Miami Heat, I believe, for a week, and then cut from the team, subsequently traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder, and then as a result, he hasn't played in the NBA since. Now, many people argue there's a difference between Kyrie Irving, who's a superstar, who has a signature shoe with, of course, Nike, then, of course, Miles Leonard, who, of course, is a journeyman. I would agree there. Many people would argue that when punishment is doled out to players, their status in terms of their talent, how good they are, the marketing, that brand that they provide for the league, all that is taken into account before, of course, discipline or sanctions are merited. With that being said, I think what is also important is many people have even articulated the idea of boycotting the NBA. I think that's rather foolish. Even though, I think that if you want to boycott the NBA, it'll be for reasons other than, of course, Kyrie Irving. I think one of the reasons is I don't think Kyrie Irving is a martyr. Number 2 is the NBA didn't suspend Kyrie Irving. The Brooklyn Nets did, right? So his employer suspended him, not the league. I think number 3, I think we also have to understand that Kyrie Irving, like many African Americans, is searching for his identity. In 2019, we know that Kyrie Irving was advocating that he was a Native American. Now, we do know that his mother was an African American, and of course, Lakota, member of the Lakota Nation. So he has a Native American background, that he was practicing Native American spirituality. However, so in 2019, he was a Christian, and of course, he was a African American. 2020, he was a Native American practicing Native American spirituality. 2021, he became a Muslim. And now in 2022, he is a Hebrew Israelite, right? So I think one of the issues that we find here, like many African Americans, for a myriad of reasons, is he's searching for his identity. But I think the difference is the fact that he searched for his identity on a public platform, publicly, and he has what I think combined throughout, if you look at the amalgamation of his social media followers, some upwards of almost 20 million social media followers. And so as a result, he has to be very extremely responsible what information he puts out and what he, of course, says. With that being said, I think what is curious, and I've always taken this position, that this isn't really an issue of anti-Blackness or even anti-Semitism. I think this is an issue of power. And I think any group of people, when they are in a position of social, political, and economic power, would take umbrage with anyone making a claim that could damage their reputation socially, politically, or even economically, even if the claim that the person is making is true. And I think that the goal for Black people be for us to find ourselves in a situation where we have the power to do the same. So I think that's one of the major issues that many people are missing. I think oftentimes, unfortunately, in our community, we want to go in someone else's house and tell them how to, of course, run the shop. It doesn't work that way. So I want you all to tap in and let me know what you all think. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to play a video by the late, great Dr. Amos Wilson. If you all know who Dr. Amos Wilson is, he's one of the sages of the Black Liberation Movement. He, of course, is the author of the seminal text, Blueprint for Black Power. If you haven't gotten it, you need to get it. I tell people all the time, I believe that book should be every Black person, every African person's Bible. But with that being said, I'm going to play a video by Dr. Amos Wilson where he talks about anti-Semitism. Then we're going to tap back in and get the conversation started. So let's see here.
Anti-Semitism stuff has got LIB jammed up. Oh yeah. People, at one point it's not a race, it's a religion. Another point, it's a race. What's going on here? The thing that you have here, ladies and gentlemen, is a political strategy. And an economic strategy. An instrument of control. A means by which one can control the behavior of others. You can call it religion, ethnicity, anything you want to, but its ultimate reality is that it is used to do control the behavior and perceptions of other people in the interest of the people who belong to that thing. That's all it is. And the first question you ask, and so the thing goes out, you're anti-Semitic. Now, it doesn't matter what you said, whether you told the truth or not the truth, or this or that, has nothing to do with that. Not at all. It has to do, now the next question you're going to ask is, oh, how can I not be anti-Semitic? Don't say this, don't say that, don't do this, don't do that, and then we won't call you anti-Semitic. And so when you're striving to be not anti-Semitic, you then fall under the control of other people. Regardless as to whether they are right or wrong, or regardless of how unfair they are, as soon as you meet the requirements of not being called anti-Semitic, you're under control. And yet, here's the people that's less than 3% of the American population, less than 1/10 of 1% of the world's population, who through the use of that term and through the throwing of that accusation can manipulate whole political and economic and social systems. And then they're the first one to tell you that you shouldn't talk in terms of race.
Before you go, make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. All right, so you all heard what Dr. Amos Wilson had to say. We know that he's one of our master teachers. So definitely tap in. I want you all to give your perspective on not only what Dr. Amos Wilson had to say, say about this idea and argument of course, being anti-Semitic. And then, of course, I want you all to tap in and we can discuss your views of Kyrie Irving, what him being suspended, so on and so forth. So the link is in the chat, and I will reiterate my position. I would agree with Dr. Amos Wilson. I think that this is part of a political dynamic in which no one is able to offer a actual critique of any kind, any way, shape, or form, due to fear of being labeled anti-Semitic. Now, that people out there who are anti-Semitic, absolutely, right? There are Holocaust deniers. There are individuals that make rather nonsensical allegations and claims about Jewish people, European Jews, so on and so forth. We know that also being Jewish, there are people of varying racial and ethnic backgrounds that are Jewish. We know there are Ethiopian Jews, there are African Jews. I've even met Persian Jews. So we know that being Jewish, there are members of the Jewish community of various racial ethnic backgrounds. But definitely want to get you all's perspective on what Dr. Amos Wilson had to say. We know that he's one of our master teachers. I'm also going to share this little known fact that even Dr. King, in his autobiography that I have right behind me, he even discusses this whole idea of anti-Semitism in the Black community. And he argued that it really wasn't anti-Semitism, that Black people's perspective and views of Jewish people in America, European Jews in America, was due to our interactions with them, particularly the fact that oftentimes we were the victims of rapacious economic business practices, right? And so as a result, our issues with the European American Jewish community was based on our personal relations and interactions with them, on which oftentimes we were being overcharged for goods and services that they were offering in our community. So once again, with that being said, tap in. The link is in the chat. The question of the day is what to make of Kyrie Irving's suspension. Definitely want to get you all's perspective. Also want to share today's Black History Fact. As you all know, I share Black History Fact every day on my channel. And today's Black History Fact, of course, is that 14 years ago today, Barack Obama was elected the 44th president of America. As many people may be aware, Barack Obama's it's arguable that Barack Obama's campaign was the most successful and efficient and well organized of any campaign in American history. And as a result, he was able to defeat not only Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primary, but also, as we know, John McCain in the national election. He received 52.9% of the electoral votes, as opposed to, of course, John McCain that only received 45.7%. So once again, just wanted to share that little known today's Black History Fact. With that being said, tap in, be part of the conversation. I personally believe that the situation with Kyrie Irving comes down to power. I think any group of people who are in a position of political, social, and economic power, as well as the fact that they have the luxury and the privilege of controlling industry, irrespective of how they got there, will tend to hold people accountable and try to vilify individuals that make claims about them, factual or truthful in nature, that they believe, of course, would do harm to their social reputation, right? And so I think my hope and my goal, of course, is that we start functioning from a top-down approach, and that we will be able to have the power one day to do the same. I can recall Marcus Garvey speaking from a top-down approach, and he argued that at one day on the African continent, we would be hanging white men for committing crimes against us, right? And so it wasn't a bottom-up approach, it was a top-down approach. And I think sometimes we need to be able to have the power to punch down rather than always punching up in a weight class. But as I stated before, the link is in the chat, brothers and sisters. The link is in the chat. Tap in and be part of the conversation. Niggas Key, what's the word?
Can you hear me?
I hear you just fine.
What's good, brother? What's good?
I'm doing quite all right. How are you?
Doing all right. But my question, I think I would have for you, what is the best way to separate anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? Because it seems like a lot of people get that confused.
Boy, you trying to pull out the big guns on me today, right? So And once again, this isn't a dictionary definition, but from what I'm familiar with regarding Zionism are individuals that support the nation state of Israel, right? And we know that there are many individuals, not only in the African American community, but throughout the world that view the nation state of Israel as a criminal settler colony, same as what? South Africa, right? And so that would be considered anti-Zionism, people who are against the existence of the nation state of Israel. Anti-Semitism would be seen as bigotry or prejudice against Jewish people. So a good example could be you could be have prejudice against Americans, right? But that doesn't mean that you are anti-America. Or you could say a death to America, right? I don't know how old you are, but 20 years ago, I remember when 9/11 took place, and of course there was the fight against the war on terror. I remember Mad TV, they did a spoof of Middle Eastern terrorists where they would have people giving news to broadcasts where they were doing the weather, and they would say, the brother said, they would say, it's going to be 78 degrees and partly sunny, but death to America, right? So that would be an example of being anti-American, but it doesn't necessitate that you are against American people, right? So it's one thing to be anti against the nation state or the government, and another thing to be, of course, against the individual people. So I think that would be an example of anti-Zionism, and of course, an example of the difference between anti-Zionism and of course, anti-Semitism. So great question. I appreciate you asking that. The link is in the chat. I know we got some more viewers. Tap in. We're going to have a great conversation, a robust conversation regarding what to make of Kyrie Irving's suspension. As I said before, I personally believe this is what happens when you are in a situation where you are working for people who have power over you. My hope, my prayer, right, my dream is that Black people collectively throughout the world, African people, we will find ourselves in a position where we have the social, political, economic, and military power to engage in top-down political discourse, top-down social engineering, top-down economic development, to where we will be able to impose sanctions on individuals that we believe are acting or engaging in rhetoric, sharing rhetoric that, of course, is vehemently anti-African and anti-Black. That is my hope. That is my prayer. With that being said, I think a good question many people would ask is, why is it that when there are individuals historically, and even, of course, today, that have engaged in anti-Black rhetoric, why aren't they suspended? I can't argue that this has happened before. We know Don Imus, when the Rutgers women's basketball team made the women's Final Four, he stated on his radio show that he said those are some nappy-headed hoes, right? And of course, there was a media backlash, and of course, he was suspended. The issue, I think, is the fact that we didn't control the industry, right? And so when we look at some of the great work of Mr. Garvey, also known as Marcus Messiah Garvey, the progenitor and creator, along with his wife, Amy Ashwood Garvey, of the UNIA, Universal Negro Improvement Association, he understood the importance of controlling industry and gaining power, not just gaining wealth for wealth's sake, not just being a capitalist for capitalism's sake, but also understanding the importance of controlling industry, right? And so I think that's one of the major issues that we find, is that even when individuals are engaging in anti-Black rhetoric, right, we advocate and we protest, but you don't have to advocate, you don't have to protest, you don't have to speak truth to power when you're in a person in power, right? You can simply press the button and the person is out of there. I think that's what we need to speak to. That's what we need to focus on. And that's what we need to be striving to gain in order to put ourselves in a position where we can restore ourselves as a free, proud, and of course, productive people. So with that being said, come on, brothers and sisters. The link is in the chat. The link is in the chat. Make sure you hit that subscribe and like button. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. The link is in the chat. Let's have a great conversation regarding Kyrie Irving, and of course, his suspension. Just broke breaking news that he, of course, gave an actual apology on his Instagram. But I think this is a major issue we need to look at in our community of how do we go about critiquing individuals, power systems, etc., or even communities. without fear of reprisal. And I would argue that one of the ways that we could do that is we have to be very specific. If you're going to make a claim, you got to have receipts, right? And then if you have receipts, you could stand on that, right? So many people would argue, well, many people make the allegation that Jewish people were involved in the transatlantic slave trade. And then they just leave it at that, right? But I think you have to get specifics. We know that, unfortunately, at that time, everyone in the world, of course, was benefiting, I dare say, from the trafficking and selling and enslavement of African bodies, of Black bodies. What we do know is that during that time period in Europe, European Jews were typically the controllers of the insurance industry. And so oftentimes when captains, enslavers, slave shipbuilding companies would go on these voyages, they would have insurance on the vehicles. And of course, insurance would go through a Jewish company in Europe. So these are facts, but I think when you make claims about Jewish involvement in the transatlantic slave trade, and I don't even like to call it a trade, because when you say trade, people oftentimes can just make the argument that it was a business gone bad with collateral damage, and we know that was not the case. But what we do know is that unfortunately that took place, that happened, right? But if you're going to give an example, you have to be very specific. For example, with Dr. King in his autobiography, when he talks about how many African Americans took umbrage with, of course, Jewish people, it was due to what? The fact that they were overcharging us for what? Goods and services, right? Taking advantage of us economically, right? So he gave specific examples. So it wasn't just based on their ethnicity. It wasn't just based on the fact that they were Jewish. It wasn't based on their religious beliefs. It was based on the fact that our collective, of course, interactions with this group of people was exploitive in nature financially, right? So that's an issue. And so I would argue if you're going to make any critique or make any claim of any community engaging in behavior that is vehemently anti-Black, that you need to be specific and of course provide receipts. So once again, the link is in the chat. I'm gonna put the link in the chat one more time for those of you who can't see it or haven't seen it. And then we got to get this party rocking, right? So listen, it's a Friday evening, and we're going to have a great conversation. And then, of course, we're going to move forward. But I think this is an important issue in our community. We could even extrapolate in some of the claims that Kanye West made, and we can discuss that as well. Is it true? Is it false? What do we do as a result of this? So definitely tap in. Want to have a great conversation. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to play the video by Dr. Amos Wilson one more time, where he's addressing this ideal and concept of anti-Semitism. And I definitely want to get you all's thoughts about that as well. So I'm going to play that video one more time. And then I hope, my prayer, right, is that we could then have a robust conversation regarding this idea of course, anti-Semitism in the Black community, and of course, Kyrie Irving's suspension. Do you believe that he should have capitulated and apologized or stood firm as a man on what he stated? Once again, as many of us know, he tweeted out without context a link to a documentary that many people alleged made claims that were anti-Semitic in nature, made claims that the Holocaust, the German Jewish Holocaust, did not take place, and that, of course, African Americans were the true children of Israel. And anyone in the Black community who's been in any type of activist spaces know they've heard that before, not only from Hebrew Israelites, but from a number of other groups as well. And then another issue, I think I would even ask a question, I could put that out there to the YouTube streets and the YouTube sphere, is where are the Hebrew Israelites to support him, right? We know if you're in any city, you've come across Hebrew Israelites who are out there yelling and speaking and so on and so forth. Now they have someone who is a prominent entertainer, prominent athlete, someone who's a multimillionaire, who was catching, of course, Black hell as a result. And some people have even argued that he's being butt broken as a result of him making these claims. Where are they to support him, right? So I think that's a major question that we're going to ask. But I'm going to play this video one more time, and then we're going to tap in and we're going to have a robust conversation regarding this whole idea of anti-Semitism in the Black community, and of course the claims that are being made by one. Kyrie Irving.
Anti-Semitism stuff that's got LIV jammed up. Oh yeah. People, at one point it's not a race, it's a religion. Another point it's a race. What's going on here? The thing that you have here, ladies and gentlemen, is a political strategy. And an economic what? Strategy. An instrument of what? Control. A means by which one can control the behavior of others. You can call it religion, ethnicity, anything you want to, but its ultimate reality is that it is used to do what? Control the behavior and perceptions of other people in the interest of the people who belong to that thing. That's all it is. And the first question you ask, and so the thing goes out, you're anti-Semitic. Now, it doesn't matter what you said, whether you told the truth or not the truth, or this or that, has nothing to do with that. Not at all. It has to do, now the next question you're going to ask is, oh, how can I not be anti-Semitic? Don't say this, don't say that, don't do this, don't do that, and then we won't call you what? Anti-Semitic. And so when you're striving to be what? Not anti-Semitic, you then what? Fall under the control of other people. Regardless as to whether they are right or wrong, or regardless of how unfair they are, as soon as you meet the requirements of not being called anti-Semitic, you're under control. And yet, here's the people that's less than 3% of the American population, less than 1/10 of 1% of the world's population, who through the use of that term and through the throwing of that accusation can manipulate whole political and economic and social systems. And then they're the first ones to tell you that you shouldn't talk in terms of race.
Powerful. So as you all heard once again, that was, of course, our master teacher, one of our sages, and, of course, an ancestor now, Dr. Amos Wilson, author of Blueprint for Black Power, stating, giving his perspective on, of course, this idea of anti-Semitism. But with that being said, the link is in the chat. I want you all to tap in. As you all know, you do not have to cam up. I repeat, you do not have to cam up to be part of the conversation. And you could use a pseudonym. So if you don't want people to know who you are exactly, you don't have to allow people to know who you are. I want you to cam up. You don't have to cam up, tap in, be part of the conversation. And I want to say that I personally think that this is an issue of power, right? We know power is the ability to create someone else's reality and have them accept it as their own. I think this is what we're seeing here. And I think, we look at some of the work of Dr. Amos Wilson. He always teaches us that the litany of issues that we find in the African global community, if it's a miseducation, if it's food deserts, if it's a cornucopia of issues, what we find is, he argues that is rooted in our collective political, social, economic, and military powerlessness, right? And so to me, I believe the goal is for us to gain power. How do we do that? First and foremost is by what? Controlling industry, right? We live in a material world, and we know that we have to what? Be able to provide material comforts, right? But number two, it provokes bread and butter issues, right? So we're able to provide jobs and a livelihood, resources, access to resources, so on and so forth. But I think one of the major issues that many of us are not looking at is that I personally believe that Kyrie Irving shouldn't have apologized, right? I think he could have simply, and he did state that, listen, there were some falsehoods in the documentary, some falsehoods in the book, so on and so forth. They asked him if he disavowed anti-Semitism or if he was an anti-Semite. And I think he kind of got explaining some word play there, some verbal judo, as they say. But I want to say this. I have a copy of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf in my personal library. I may even advise people to read it. It doesn't mean I'm endorsing what he says in the book, right? I have the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, right? It doesn't mean that I'm endorsing Nazism simply because I have the book in my library, or that I may tell someone, hey, you need to read this, right? So I think this is a situation in which, once again, he put this out here without context. But I don't think he's someone we should be caping for, right? I think he's a grown man. He could hold his own. And the reality of the situation is, anyone is being honest, he's someone who, is kind of trying to find himself. I had a great conversation with one of my brothers from New York earlier, and he said, well, we got to stand by somebody. I said, I disagree. I think we should give people support who deserve our support, right? And I think this is akin to the situation we found with Deontay Wilder, right? Deontay Wilder going into his first fight with Tyson Fury, Tyson Fury's camp in the media, well, of course, promoting this whole idea of him overcoming suicidal ideation, overcoming drug addiction, so on and so forth. And Tyson and Deontay Wilder took issue with that. Like, please, man, Black people, we've been struggling and fighting for 400 years, which I would agree. Radio Raheem, who was a boxing reporter, he's typically boots on the ground. He's at the fights. He's in the camps, asking questions of the trainers, of the fighters, of the team. And he stated that, he said, well, what do you mean by that, brother Deontay? What do you mean by the fact we've been fighting for 400 years? Deontay Wilder ended up spazzing out on him. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. Why did he do that? Because he didn't have the words to articulate what he actually meant. So I'm of the thinking that if you don't have the words to speak in a manner that is becoming of our struggle, shut the HU hockey sticks up, right? Because you're going to make us look bad, right? And then when people say that's who's representing you, that's your spokesperson, and they don't really know what they're talking about, it becomes an issue, right? I myself, I'm the type of person, if I'm going to put something out there, I make sure that what I'm promoting is 100% factual, because if it's not, that reflects poorly on my reputation, right? I can recall when I was part of the Coalition of African Unity. I helped co-found the Coalition of African Unity, Pan-Africans organization, of course, in my hometown, Dayton, Ohio, 937 Stand Up. And we were looking to have a some movie nights, Friday evening movie nights for the youth at rec centers, wait for them to stay out of trouble, have a good time, feed them some good pizza, watch some documentaries, some movies, have a robust intellectually stimulating conversation. One of the brothers said, well, let's show Hidden Colors. I said, it's a great documentary. However, not all of the information in that documentary is historically accurate. And so if we show this, then of course we are now attesting to this, and that puts us in a bad light of people start coming back and fact checking us, right? And so I think that's the issue, but definitely want everyone to tap in, be part of the conversation. We're talking about what to make of Kyrie Irving's suspension, what to make of Kyrie Irving's suspension. As I said before, you do not have to cam up to be part of the conversation. And of course, if need be, if you want, you could use a pseudonym so that no one knows who you actually are, if you feel that your opinion may draw the ire of some rather prominent individuals or entities or organizations. So once again, cam up, tap in. You don't have to cam up. Let's have a robust conversation regarding this issue with Kyrie Irving, and of course, allegations of anti-Semitism. One of the brothers tapped in very early into the broadcast and asked the question, what is the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? And I believe I gave a accurate answer, saying that anti-Zionism is individuals or entities or organizations that are opposed to the existence of the nation state of Israel. Many of these individuals who take this position, not all, but many, take this position because they have the belief that the nation state of Israel is a criminal settler colony in Palestine, similar to the nation state that was set up in what is now known as South Africa. While anti-Semitism would be, of course, bigotry and prejudice towards Jewish people. With that being said, I think I would be remiss in my duty in having this conversation if I did not state that there are Jewish people of various ethnic, racial backgrounds. I've met Ethiopian Jews. I've met Persian Jews. I've met white Jews. I've met even some African Jews, right? Sub-Saharan African Jewish people. So Russian Jews, right? German Jews, right? So Swedish Jews, right? So I think it's important for us to understand that being Jewish is compensates individuals of varying racial ethnic backgrounds. So with that being said, tap in, be part of the conversation. If not, we're going to call it a night. But I definitely want to get some people to come in and share their perspective on what they think about this rather controversial and extremely provocative issue regarding Kyrie Irving. And of course, the issue of him being suspended. Many people are arguing that he's been buck broken because he has, of course, given an official apology. I think one of the things that was rather curious that after this took place, before they came out and made the claim that they were going to donate $1 million combined to the Anti-Defamation League, the owner of the Brooklyn Nets, Joe Tsai, per the report that was published on ESPN.com today, said that he had been in constant contact, trying to get in contact with Kyrie Irving via text message, phone call, email, etc., and that Kyrie simply ignored him. So I think this might even be an issue with the Brooklyn Nets of them kind of being fed up with, of course, many of the antics that Kyrie Irving has engaged in since he signed with the Nets. We know that first off, he stated, "Hey, we don't need a coach." Then he went AWOL for about three weeks, didn't tell anyone, just was out. Then, of course, we know there was even the situation with the not getting vaccinated, but then he said that he wasn't anti-vax. So I think this is a situation, of course, but this is a young brother who's trying to find himself. But I think he's lacking maybe the guidance needed to actually crystallize and provide a cogent argument to his perspective and worldviews. And I would argue that maybe part of this is due to the fact that he doesn't have a clear worldview or ideological frame of reference to lean on, to undergird his actions, his decisions, and the way he views the world. So with that being said, tap in, be part of the conversation. Link is in the chat. If you don't want to tap in, definitely leave your perspectives in the comment section. I could post them, and of course, we can have a conversation that way. But we're, of course, touching on primarily what to make of Kyrie Irving's suspension. So let me know what you all think. Please tap in, be part of the conversation. The link is in the chat. As I stated before, and I state again ad nauseum, you do not have to come up to be part of the conversation. And of course, you can use a pseudonym if you want, if you deem it necessary. But we just want to have a robust conversation regarding this issue, accusations of anti-Semitism. We could even open it up to talking about Black and Jewish relations. Many people argue that there's a historical relationship there going all the way back. Brother Bawana says he's still working, but he's listening. Appreciate that, brother. To, of course, the fight for civil rights, during the civil rights movement. Many people even go back to, of course, the founding of the NAACP. I would argue a bit there that there was a relationship there, but I think it was a bit nuanced. We know that, of course, Ida B. Wells, I think Mary McLeod Bethune, and even, of course, we know W.B. Du Bois were members of the NAACP, some of the founding members of the NAACP, along with, of course, Jewish men. But many people would argue, of course, including Marcus Garvey, that many Black people were clustered during that time. We do know that W.B. Du Bois created the Crisis magazine that is still to this day the literary organ of the NAACP. However, many people may not be aware that there came a time where Du Bois felt that the NAACP was not addressing issues the way the Jewish issue addressed issues. And what I mean by that, the NAACP tended to be a reactionary organization focused on protest, and of course, focused on protests and, of course, litigation through the courts. But a Bawana states secret relationship between Blacks and Jews, the NOI book. Well, could you elaborate? What do you posted this book, Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews? What about it? I know a bit about the book. The book claims that Jewish people were prominent members of the prominent slavers in the transatlantic slave trade. The Jewish people that were involved, like most individuals were involved, but they weren't prominent, right? So that's one of the overarching theses. The overarching thesis of the book. However, they were involved, but they weren't prominent. They weren't the preeminent group that was involved. So that, of course, is a misnomer. And we know that, unfortunately, the Nation of Islam is known for taking liberties with the truth, right? Many people would argue that they embellish the truth oftentimes. So appreciate you putting it up there, Brother Bawana. But if you could elaborate on why you mentioned that book, that'd be greatly appreciated. But as I was stating, with the NAACP, not Garvey, but W.B. Du Bois, of course, made the argument that Black people needed to handle the issues the way Jewish people did, focusing on, of course, economics, financial literacy, and education. And of course, it was argued and stated that they told him, "Hell no, we won't go And so, of course, they two split ways. So parted ways. So with that being said, once again, if you are watching, the link is in the chat. Tap in, be part of the conversation. Still hoping Brother Bawana can tap in and share, or at least put in the comments, why he mentioned the secret relationship between the blacks and the Jews. According to it's an old Nation of Islam book that, of course, was published back during the mid 1990s. So with that being said, once again, tap in. You do not have to cam up, but I am definitely interested in having a robust conversation about, of course, Kyrie Irving, anti-Semitism, and then, of course, the Black and Jewish relationship. So with that being said, okay, oh my, I'm trying not to get pulled in right now. I got to finish this work, but I'm going to come on if I finish in time. How long do you think it's going to take you, brother? You got to let me know that. And once again, if you don't want to tap in live, you can, of course, share comments, put your comments in the chat. If you're watching, make sure you hit the thumbs up button. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. As you know, you're watching LumuMbaSpeaks.com here on YouTube, a Black Empowerment Initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. As you all know, I like to provide a balanced perspective on any issue that takes place in the Black community. I think oftentimes when people come to these conversations, they may bring some of their personal views in. Oftentimes there may even be some emotionalism that comes in. And I think, but oftentimes when individuals are having these conversations, they tend to not be balanced, right? They tend not to be rooted in facts. I could give an example where a brother was talking about how the Moors in Europe were Black Africans. And I said, well, brother, that's just, once again, that's a bit of an embellishment, right? And I had to break down history, and there were other people on the platform. Shout out to Brother Dinah Samir with Search for Uhuru when I was on his platform earlier today, where I had mentioned that during the Middle Ages, being a Moor was a political designation, not a, of course, racial or ethnic one, right? And what I mean by that is there were Moors who were white Europeans, there were Moors who were Black Africans, there were Moors who were Berbers, there were Moors who were Arabs. And this is not some type of deep knowledge, right? This is something that you can learn by simply doing a Google search. You can learn this by going on Wikipedia. And so I think oftentimes, unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation being disseminated because we're not, of course, reviewing a scholarly literature. When the brothers talked about what makes a source reputable, and I said what makes a source reputable is this process called peer review. When you submit your manuscript to a publication, and then they review, right? It's called a blind peer review. So they don't know who you actually are. They don't know who's the author of the literature that they're writing. And then as a result, what takes place is they review and fact check to make sure that before they publish your manuscript, that every claim that you're making is factual, right? You can have an overarching thesis in which you are promoting or disseminating a particular perspective. However, they have to do a fact check to make sure that every claim that you're making is, of course, factual. And so that's part of what makes a source reputable or not. Brother Bawana, now I don't think I'm gonna be going on for an hour. Maybe if there was people tapping in and we were able to have a robust conversation, but that doesn't seem like it's happening tonight. I don't blame folk. We know it's a Friday night. The mood is right, and people trying to make sure that they don't come home tonight, right? So with that being said, if no one has any more thoughts or comments, I'm going to call it a night. So I'm gonna hang out maybe for another couple of minutes. But once again, the link is in the chat. We want to have a robust conversation regarding what to think of Kyrie Irving's suspension. Has he been buck broken, as many people say? And then, of course, we can really open up and extrapolate regarding the historical relationship between, of course, Blacks and Jews, no pun intended, regarding the Nation of Islam book. But then, of course, we could even look at this whole idea of anti-Semitism. We could review, of course, what Dr. Amos Wilson stated regarding anti-Semitism is this being used as an issue of social control, to have power over people, to actually construct and manipulate a social, political, and economic systems to their favor. Definitely want to get you all's perspective on that. However, I do know this is a hot button topic. This is also a very sensitive topic, and so I definitely understand if you don't want to cam up. If you want to use a pseudonym, that is quite all right. But with that being said, If not, I got you on the other line. No problem. I'm going to call it a night. You all have a good one. Make sure to subscribe and like button. Until next time, peace. Thanks.